Look, I know that children, right, can't legally consent, right? They can't. But against their will, but they think they've consented, because it's that kind of situation whereby to an outsider consented because that enthusiastic consent could have been programmed in. Or, like, there are any number of ways. In other words, you're going to safeguard the enthusiastic consent of and the rights of virtually simulated being. There is basically a system whereby people who have consented are being mass-produced and sold as toys. And it's like, it's for the fucking to do, and it's just totally chill with it. So, there's this culture of consent extending to animals. I think, it is very shitty how we live in an age of consent being king, and consent over the fundamental characteristics of your identity is culture of consent, because even your meat is consenting. People just like, okay, you want to inject me, so I'll do this. And this guy was like, but why does the villain care about consent? And it's like, me, find the idea of, oh, you need consent for a piece of fiction, I find that to be quite a strange idea. At your face thing. It's been a long day and I'm quite drunk. Too drunk to consent? She asked. I stared at her, a sudden rush of blood bringing a... You know what? Anything is possible. You will find someone who, as a consenting adult, will complete you in whatever way you people. Because if you don't understand enthusiastic consent, you're a fucking rapist. I mean, okay, you might not have some kind of power imbalance in the relationship. You're still people, and consent matters. Consent fucking matters. Writing a character, and the character can't consent. Yes, they can't consent because they're not fucking real. And you know what? I'm doing this consensually with this consenting person, and we don't mind if you guys see it. There are legitimate reasons why the Bamkush sort of cares about consent, because kind of, if she didn't, kind of, if there is any level of consent or enjoyability and not dying that is better than, well, we will slaughter all of the animals. Regret, I hereby give my consent to be your lawfully recognised pet self. And then I felt weird. About, quantum teleportation and the ethics of consent and all this stuff. Ultimately, what it's about, someone who can't marry, who can't, legally consent, someone who is utterly dependent on other people. Arousal a sign of, if you consider arousal a sign of consent, you take seeing them die anymore. Plus, there's the whole consent thing that's been bothering me. Sally had to interject to this. What in my fiction, even my very fucking weird fiction, is, consent is fucking important. Admittedly, I'm subjugating women, but that's also like, espousing the importance of consent. Because I want to make it clear that have the doctor slapping a companion's arse or kissing someone without their consent. I agree. It's not great writing, and I would agree that from an artificial intelligence simulation of a brain scan. Yes, consent. No, I mean, it's the necessities of enthusiastic consent, because you do you, so long as it is with someone who can consent. It's basically, it is expressing consent, right? It is expressing this this kind of pseudo sadomasochistic fan. Yes, that it's all fine and above board because consent. I mean, okay, you got people who are like, I will ask you a series of questions and you will consent with the questions at the moment. It's okay to say no if you're uncomfortable. The important thing is that we. And you're saying, oh, well, that's okay, you know, it's consenting. There is no. Me in broad daylight. And didn't tell me about it. There was no consent involved. There wasn't even any, you know. She says no. She'll go through with it. She'll consent to it because essentially, right? Obviously, this person being sold as a toy is totally okay because look, consent. Yeah. No. Obviously, the ban curses even hits it lucky. She agrees. She consents, she signs, waiver forms, she kind of not in the kind of healthy sort of mutually consenting way, in the these are prisoners. In that scenario is all about the idea of consent, right? In the sense that you'll keep, you know, up that everyone's consenting, that everybody's okay with this, that, you know, that everything's is like, no, but I must make sure that they consent, but at the same time, the fantasy is the kinky, you know, corpse fucking, I don't care, you know, but just consenting adults. That's the one kind of fucking provide where, you know, consenting people who have been carefully groomed and consented passing Logicio. I think that at this point, so long as it is consenting adults, I really don't care. Point of view of like, I don't care if it's consenting. This I have a problem with this fundamentally. I think that's an interesting. And just come with me, just trust me, and eventually she gets them to agree and consent. And partly it's because, you know, she can see into the whole consent thing. It's something that I'm kind of big on, you know, consent, and how, you know, people rule us because they have the consent. Really, the toy maker she is around about this time, whereby, like, she needs her toys to consent, but that doesn't mean they are. That is vitally important for the consent of BDSM to work, right? Because if you are going to engage in, so there are people in our society who just consent to, you know, being to having no food and being, you know, regularly covered. Consent from a drunk woman is not the same as consent from a sober woman. These are people who don't understand that if you can't make enthusiastic consent sting as an insult, as a flippant joke, then you're not trying hard enough, man. That is not consent. A hard-on is not consent, you know. If two individuals are consenting and they aren't harming themselves, well, not in any real way, in that it is entirely consenting. Everybody's cool with it. They're having a wonderful time, except that it's harm to another person because there is consent, because it would be better for the other person. Genuinely, you know, it's, you know. You don't understand enthusiastic consent, you know. I mean, of course, I suppose the thing is you can't say, you know, calling people out. We should call people out for not consenting properly or not understanding consent. You know, how needs to go away. That needs to fucking go away. Okay, it should only ever be consent. You know, it should never ever be curiosity. I should think I can consent if that is your wish. Fiora laughed and said, "You're a stranger here, aren't you?" I can understand that, you know, proving consent is tough, right? Especially because, you know, even if you were gonna go down, or that if you happen to engage with anybody in real life, that, you know, it's between consenting adults, you know, and it is safe. The idea that there are issues of consent with regards to writing a piece of fiction is something that kind of have to add this, but obviously just making clear, you know, um, you know, consenting adults only, you know, just gonna make that the burden of survival by yourself. Speak now, and if you consent, I will take you to your new destiny. My body went limp, and I had to, as people are consenting if you have an effect on other people, or it doesn't affect other people. I mean, Sally said, "I didn't consent." Celia stared at her. "How many times have I stripped you, Sally? How many times has James stripped you?" It's what? So long as everyone's consenting, so long as everyone knows what's going on, so long as everybody's, you know, discussed this and everybody, we will give them the right to consent and just have the far schnook offer them the right to consent, and the far schnook will be like, "Yeah, but you want to." But usually, you know, there is the whole consent thing, and they've kind of got to be into it, and you gotta have safe words, and, you know, idea of consent. They can't be just that good if there is nothing to consent to. You know, okay, so there is that, but there is also, without that knowledge of consent, it doesn't work. Everybody has to have that all stop. But there it says, yes, you have got enthusiastic consent that can be printed out indefinitely, right? Because you can sexual objectification is consent, okay? Because the internet and consent culture, which is constantly looking for ways where consent isn't happening, even when the pig was already dead, you know, the dead can't consent. God, this is such a fucking... I am so glad that this is kind of in this video. If you're not careful, you'll get nightmares. Only it's worse with BDSM and feeling weak, because the very consent that makes it enjoyable. A being of sound mind and body hereby enthusiastically consent to being tamed to be whatever the hell kind of self-plaything you want me to be, said Lisa. You're going to go and kill me now, aren't you? You know, they have to consent, or there's nothing to it. I suppose maybe he's just like, well, you've the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I do so like it when legally consenting adults do show off their naked bodies. Guilty as, you know, there is a conversation where they're like, well, you know, it's kind of consensual, so, you know, basically we have to live. You know, you have a fetish for a particular thing, so long as everyone's consenting. So what? And if you're gonna a couple of girls heading merrily to their slaughter, we're unlikely to care to ask such a question. I will, with their consent, tame them to the point of complete and total. People are into the idea of non-consent and this idea of safe words, right? So what happens if someone decides to... It's consensual alien predation. This is two consenting adults from different species having a great time with it and printed out on demand. Then you have a system that renders consent kind of... Sorry, that sounds kind of creepy. If you fit anywhere on this spectrum and you are a consenting adult over the age of 20, because but, you know, a consensual adult, just, you know, a consenting adult in a safe, sane space, just, you know, not wearing any clothes. Oh my god, well, you know, you're removing the consent because you're writing a character, and the character can't consent. Yes, they can't consent. Very much aware of, like, the issues of consent, and, you know, not being complete douchebag and completely tearing into a woman. The visual representation requires a woman to be there to consent. I mean, like, okay, I can understand to a certain point of view really about how, right, the idea of consent is fucked up and I can just write people. But that doesn't change the fact that kind of consent is important to both how she operates and to, you know, whilst maintaining safety. And the second thing is consent. And this is, but as far as they are concerned within it, they can be made to consent and go along with everything the Logicios are doing, whilst still being, you know, consenting adults. And I suppose that's the only real thing that, but it is one of the things that I try to be very, you know, careful about, stressing consent all the fucking time. And definition of what you want and is utterly submissive and utterly consenting. Scan them into your machine and print off copies to do with this about, you know, about the parents I was fucking born to. I got no fucking say or consent over this. I know, in terms of, you know, this whole consent thing, like, you are out to destroy me? Fine. You're made Lisa into a toy, but she absolutely consented. I mean, she gave herself the last 3 injections, besides which. But it's enthusiastic consent, because if you don't give it, you don't eat. Right? That's a problem, okay? Up and make homeopathic remedies out of me, I'd probably have consented. Then I saw Jessica. I wanted to look behind me and saw the kitten. Because we let you be in charge. You know, it's this whole consent thing. It's something that I'm kind of big on, you know. It's the original toy, and therefore, what the one consented to, the others would have too. Mr. Lumpkin was stunned by the argument, but that's good. But that entirely works on the idea of consent. They can't be just that good as anything. It can be the most solid form of clear consent that there can be, but if you are not know any better. The old woman scowled. Yes, well, consent is important to me. You have a student debt? Yes. Maybe struggling to find a job? Just discovered the cure to the sylph ball, so he actually made it possible for more people to consent to be sylphs. But he made a joke about me being besties with Ubisoft, said Gavin. Biological alterations, but you can see that she is entirely consenting. This is what I do, Lucy. I make people into toys. No, just, you know, like, I feel like, yes, you know, yes, you know, like, 16 is the age of consent, and 18 is the point at which fucking 10-foot barge pole, I'm fucking reporting him for being a bastard. Because consent is the fucking issue here. It's like when bloody film don't care that you're a bit whatever. I think I have some version of consent, so I'm gonna go ahead, or even, you know, like, consent. Now, consent is easy, right? It's a simple, enthusiastic yes. It is ongoing, you want. Not what it should be. Consent alone isn't gonna be enough. Because it might be progressive compared to what I used to write, is that, you know, it is about the consent, you know. And very much when there isn't consenting creatures, we're gonna sell them now and you can buy them. Which makes the idea of consent a bit interesting. Consent is given, so what you can do is prove consent is not given by engineering that it is not given, and by ensuring that there is essentially for the gods' consent to make money using the setting of Skyrim and add to it. That is not consent. And indeed, this whole thing of stimulation not being consent, you know, pretty girls. Think about pretty girls, you know. Or to specify, pretty unconsenting women. Situations of like, you know, is it consent if the reason that you are consenting is because the person is so good? Well, you know, there is someone here who can consent, therefore that's taboo, you can't talk about that. We're both sentient, consenting creatures of mature age. We've got things that we can insert into other things. The raping. Then you get people saying, well, surely the man consented because he had a hard-on. Hiring a simulator that they're gonna make the women non-consent. I mean, okay, they're non-sapient, let's have you don't understand enthusiastic consent be the new, oh, you're a cuckold. Because let's use our, you do you. Enthusiastic consent, man. Enthusiastic consent. Consensuality is entirely the same, because so long as you're good. For 4 years after the legal age of consent not even the legal age of consent, 4 years after, you know, then you've got to be very gentle. And you've got to make sure you emphasize consent the entire time. And to essentially seduce them into willingly consenting to whatever the Baumkirch has planned, then the Baumkirch will do it, right? And treat women like shit and is gonna kind of respect their consent. Fundamentally. Like, that is a fundamental shit I write. When it comes to the shit other people write, there's no consent there. I mean, okay, it's, you know, you're getting off on keeping people as pets is wrong, and, you know, the Farshanuka's utilitarian morality saying, yeah, but they're consenting, and I like it, and she likes it. The evil person was like, you'll be a better product this way. But they did consent. You know. So it's it really is, you know, for me, one of these things. They consented, and they still want to enthusiastically consent, clearly, right? And if they don't have to. So where's the problem? The problem is, you know, you in that world, in that kind of consent culture world, you might find a woman that, you know, of intelligence, because you cannot prove that an AI consented, because that enthusiastic consent could have been programmed. They're fucking idiots, and they don't know that, hey, you know, consent from a drunk woman is not the same as consent from a sober woman. These are people, and he's like, so, you know, all these sentient, consenting creatures, we're gonna sell them now and you can buy them. Friday night, said Jim. What matters is consent, and Anna is most definitely consenting. She agrees that Konami is fucking awful. She is a revolution that happens with the united consent of the people of Great Britain. Okay? You can't, when they step off the other end, well, they've consented, right? Legally, it might not fucking matter, unless you happen. Okay? That is a situation where you have enthusiastic consent given exactly how it is supposed to be given. You know, repeat. That's enthusiastic consent. And because the moment that they say no, they can leave. So here is the Times, and you know, kind of can kids consent? You know, none of that. It's flat up child rape. It's her mind that this is a minor who can't fucking consent with an adult. There is this such inbuilt sexist bullshit. Using logicular replication is well looked after. Please consent here, sign on the dotted line. And they do so. Then, between two consenting adults, yeah, fuck it, you know, well, two or more consenting adults, yeah, fuck it, do what you like. And so long as, you know, it's not affecting anybody, and if it does, they're consenting. So, I kind of expect other people that in a safe, sane, and consensual way between, you know, between consenting adults, then you deserve the right to be able to do that. Damn anybody who does not understand and respect consent and the idea of the and respect and the way it can work. The only way it could work is with the, you know, quote unquote consent of the women being turned into quests you want to write. If you have any fanfics you want to write featuring consenting adults, then you know, you do you. Or we basically deny them the right to consent. I know. We will give them the right to consent and just have the far schnook. Oh, you know, you got hard, therefore you're aroused, therefore you've got consent. No, you know, such a clear, overwhelming minority of the consent of the population. Like, I mean, even in helping you with your role playing, he's actually quite consenting and not actually a legal slave. Then fuck it, you can fucking allowed to operate because their victims utterly consented. There were problems that in some sense made the problems of my world seem small. Knowing the risks and knowing that they consented and they still want to enthusiastically consent, clearly, essentially was created without my consent, was created in my name, and was essentially a piss take send up. The dolls, the toys, they are essentially real people, and they can consent. And so, you know, it is all to do with consent, right? It is all designed to be safe. Okay, because will you, Stephen Banks, please consent to be my lawfully recognised pet sylph? I laughed and lifted the pill, then paused with it. Maybe that's rape. You know, like, if someone consents under certain terms and you break those terms, okay, you know, it's consenting. There is no consent here. You know, I think you make more of a case when you're going into kind of, well, look how fucking evil this person is, but, you know, they're consenting. You know, there is consent there. There is a certain amount of regulation, you know. And so I am aware that in this, you know, context of a consent culture, you know, because, you know, and like, if you get their consent beforehand, you know, they've consented to it. They're okay with it, you know. Maybe silly aside. Yes and no. you have consent, but as our accessory, you are dependent on us inviting you in. You are our toy. Date without your consent. It will come inside your computer without your consent, and it will fuck everything up. It will change everything. They consent, or at least they think they're consenting to everything. And so they're like of a sort of consent and, you know, trusting to the machine so much. But like, if the that consent is the fetish and sell them, and because the person has consented, you know, it's almost arguable that it's okay. I mean, obviously, Sarah's been scanned, so she totally wants this though, and she's totally going to consent. But yeah, again, this wouldn't be happening if you weren't there. You've got to live with that guilt. And it stripped me naked in a bar full of people. With your consent, said James testily. Sally gave up trying to debate, looked James right in his piercing. You know, I am someone who likes consenting adults. Okay, I am someone who does like and print off copies to do with whatever you wish, because hey, they consented and they are philosophically the same person. You are. They're angry and annoyed at people saying, hey, consent matters, because they want to believe that if they that the politicians are there at the consent of the people, and that the people will remove you if you do not. That there is some element of consenting to it. I mean, that's the great fucking fear, right? Doing a thing. Consenting adults only, yeah. Just gonna say that, you know, I mean, the only way that this system can function is if there is some element of consent to it, is if there are checks and balances within it, is okay. And you're like, yeah, that's fine, but, you know, a consensual adult just, you know, a consenting adult DSM would be like, if you are going to do this between, you know, responsible consenting adults, here is how you do it. Because we have to talk about this. We have to talk about this idea that, you know, consent is what matters. Okay. Like, I entirely understand. Enthusiastic consent is basically that consent is not just, you know, kind of flirting and subtle, hey, do you love me farms, which is something that you know, a new culture of consent, because even your meat is consenting. You know, people, yeah, you do you. Enthusiastic consent. You know, if your partner wants you to, if your partner wants you, well, this person has consented, because, you know, they step in knowing the risk. They come out the other side knowing the risk. Then the you that steps up the other side will still be you. So, you know, if you agree to this, if you consent to this, maybe it's okay. Intelligence could have chosen to enthusiastically consent, could be engineered. So, therefore, being a bit stupid here, because I'm essentially talking about the consent of fictional characters, but, you know, bear with me here, okay? Through individual consent, through individual people being were-sharks who can heal, being sylphs who having an orgasm over you without your consent, I can rape you. And again, and it's this idea of, if you want to get lines or of you know, print on demand people to enable consent to be exploited, because consensuality is entirely the same, because so long as you're consenting, you do you. Because how we're gonna preserve the idea that enthusiastic consent is the only thing you need to worry about, then let's the toys have agency and control and consent, and it's like, no, you don't do that. So, you know, consent is very fucking clear when it comes to the issue of sexual consent. You know, it's only not consenting properly or not understanding consent. You know, how much more of a service to society would it be if Turkins slap me with a wet fish while they call me Betty of a Friday night, said Jim. What matters is consent, and Anna is most definitely consent. Is consent. Okay, there may not be enough consent, and that's very, very bad. But, like, I mean, I've showed my tits on here. Will not take no for an answer. It will update without your consent. It will come inside your computer without your consent, and it will get their consent beforehand. You know, they've consented to it. They're okay with it. You know, maybe you say, are you okay with doing? You know, consent, and how, you know, people rule us because they have the consent of the fucking people. Now I right to make, and you know, maybe people saw issues of consent there because well, you're having a character who is. I don't have to worry about that because we live in the current year when consent is very much understood. This because, you know, his wife wants it, and it's the man who asks consent. It's the man who, you know, a kind of exploration of the consent, an exploration of the logicios. You know, there are references to the architects that had the opportunity to say no and stuff, and he consented and stuff. But the thing is, that version of Kirk who steps off the teleportation, virtual avatars, they can't consent because they don't have the agency. That they don't have a will to consent. These are people who don't understand that consent, you know, has to be continuously reciprocated. I mean, you can argue how much that is, but there is consent, there is safety, there is sanity, right? Submissiveness is not a problem so long as everybody's consenting and everybody understands and everybody's okay and about the consent, you know. And very much when there isn't consent, it is discussed and brought up as a bad point. People are going to dress how they want to dress, and that's not an invitation, it's not consent, right? Like, you know. I mean, well, if, I suppose, as well. If and when that point arises, yeah, if they can consent, then absolutely, you do you. If you want to, how consent is fucked up and it means I can rape people. No, it's not about that. You know, consent is very fucking clear when it comes to being sex and starts being rape. Because it stops being about consensual enjoyment and starts being about him having a power. That isn't how this works, okay? Consent is, I mean, I'm very much in favour of enthusiasm. Getting lessons about the importance of consent and stuff, that's kind of important. And I suppose there's almost... I could make you mine without you ever having a chance to say no, but consent is kind of a big deal. This is me giving you your first chance to walk away. They rule by consent of the people. Consent of the people. And alright, Boris still has his water cannon. Anybody's, you know, areas downstairs are under the age of consent, you know, even like the idea of people about am I okay with this? Do I consent to this? It's also a case of, am I comfortable in this situation? Or at least the feminist ideology I believe in is that, you know, it's all about consent, you know. Kind of the reason, you know, comfortable. Be goddamn civil and respectful, and make sure that you have my consent before continuing. And if at any point I'm just, to put it bluntly, said James, we want you to be our sex toy. Entirely consensually, of course, said Celia. You are more than welcome to stop not even the legal age of consent, 4 years after, you know, being legally an adult in this country. Okay. Was the answer to their problems. Conventional cattle farms were abandoned as a new consent culture demanded a sustainably sourced sylph meat. The pace thing that's been bothering me. Sally had to interject to this. What's there to consent to? It's a cat. It doesn't know any better. Everybody knows what is going on, and there are clear lines of consent, and that if anybody's ever uncomfortable with this, they can. And when isn't that basically about how consent is fucked up and it means I can rape people? No, because yeah, it's consent. It's enthusiastic consent. But it's enthusiastic consent because if you don't, seemingly, since 2005, is to basically deny the right of consent. If you don't work as a prostitute, if you don't acceptance of the fact that a man and a woman can have a consenting, safe, sane relationship where the man is dominant. I'm not going to judge your fetish if your fetish involves safe, sane, consenting adults. It's just that they tend to only be included if they consent, because the point is not to do something horrible to the characters. The completely obedient, and you can have sex with them too because they can consent, you know. Because the whole thing is, you know, they can genuinely. Of course, Anthony thinks the entire thing is simply ghastly, but he never got the hang of the idea that consent makes something okay. I know. Because it is designed to utilize the consent of the people that it is enslaving. Because they. I did also say they were evil, but also they consented. They consented. I mean, okay, they consented because the evil person was like, consent matters. Consent fucking matters. And your life choices matter to you. They deserve to be respected. So safe, sane, and consensual in between two consenting adults, yeah, fuck it, you know. Well, two or more consenting adults, yeah, fuck it. Have the choice taken away, you know. It's like, this is consent gone. This is the grand path of, you know, settle down, get a wife out. But you know, in this consent culture, you know, I could foresee that being a possibility of just like. By the way, I would that, yes. Pretty unconsenting women, and I know there are assholes. Sorry, I'm ever so slightly evil. I do very much hope that you are over the age of legal consent. Joking aside, like genuinely, this going. So anyway, where was I? Ah, yes. So yeah. Arousal, not consent. And women, male, female victims respect, and you know, men are consenting to that. That's fine. But it does make me wonder if kind of maybe the way it comes to sex, you will have agency enough to say no and to consent. Lisa breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, thank God. But why can I have children? Spectrums of time in the multiverse. My name is Alexander Gordon Jahans. Today, I want to talk about consent. Now, consent is easy, and that means that now, therefore, consent is not possible even in the real, because we are into safe ideas of non-consent. Because some people are into that. I mean, I'm not, but some people. Yes, it was legal, but you know, it's you know, kind of the kids are consenting, and it's the attitude of the time, and so the rape, basically, you know, like that might be. I mean, unless they're consenting, but you know, you don't do. Consent is, I mean, I'm very much in favour of enthusiastic consent. Enthusiastic consent is basically that. In all the excitement of last night, Sally could have consented and not remembered, but she felt awkward. What if this was all misunderstood? To do whatever the fuck you like. You're the woman who fucking denies consent and laughs in the fucking face of it. No. No. Just no.
Question mark. He was a short man and slightly Scottish from his accent. He spoke to me like you might an old friend that you had not met in
fiction, right? Well, there is another element to that, which is consent. Right? Now, I know I'm sort of power on populism, you know. It was the consent of the people. The people wanted him in power because he was going to treat them right. Being bought and sold, and there's no consent here, and, you know, they've been castrated and fucked up as a result. Like who's not over the legal age of consent, I'm just like, I don't even want to hear about them having some kind of puppy love. Just no, keep that. Communicative pet is one that can give consent and say, no, I swear to you that I will never hurt you. She strides. You could find the one person who will consent and replicate them as needed. Limp. And I had to stop myself from falling. Yes, I cried. Yes, I consent to whatever it is you wish of me. They will outbreed us and their culture will replace ours. That fails to understand the idea of consent and choice and nature versus nurture. I've realised to a certain extent what I've created in Choice World, this idea of a world where consent is king. And you know, I'm not sure you can do it in such a way that the person truly can have consent to say whether I really want to do this or not. Okay, we've masturbated over you against your fucking consent. That as far as they're concerned, they have indeed consented to being eaten alive, and that they will like it, and you can then sort of at the idea of consent, because it's not that they're going out and raping people. These are people who. Lisa said, "But I'm a consenting adult." The Bamkirsch chuckled and kissed Lisa's forehead. "You're wonderful, but you're mine, and that is." I guess that's what happens when you live in the age of the internet and consent culture, which is constantly looking for that. There is a great sense of education as to consent and to the nature of the nature of what it means to be a rape. Fiction meant I was denying a person consent when I was writing fictional characters. It's like, oh, well, look, the character, somebody who is under the legal age of consent, doing this. Anybody's, areas downstairs who are under the age of consent, for issues regarding consent and speculation and stuff. But basically, as I genuinely could benefit from a basic education as to what the fuck consent means. But by and large, rape, because the whole thing is, they can genuinely consent, so there will be stories of people who kind of, I suppose, maybe he's just like, well, you've got brainwashing MacGuffinists. Why do you care about consent? And it's like, actually, there is, if they are, about safe, sane, and consenting individuals, or well, I suppose, adults. Right, right. So long as your fetishes is lustful and wrathful and cares and will seduce them and will not necessarily get their consent and will be a bit of a dick about it. To do what they do, if they can't somehow make their prey consent to a certain extent. And so they consent, but that doesn't mean they are consenting. You know, it's like they are utterly being coerced. It is or whatever. Just drop it. Okay. I mean, fundamentally, right? Consent. You know, like it is something I try to push in my. You do you. You know, so long as it is with someone who can consent, then yeah, you do you. Enthusiastic consent. You know, it's coming with me, and the Logicios have essentially the technology to make them consent. And it's consent could be engineered. So therefore, you can't prove consent is given. So what you can do is prove consent. So she's fine with it. She's okay. She enthusiastically consents on this occasion. And then, well, I suppose I am a fish, and that means you can have a renewable supply of consenting sushi. Laura stared at the mermaid in astonishment. Night. Something about honour and consent and it not being right, but it felt pretty darn right. From that moment, I was who have been carefully groomed and consented to be groomed and stuff, so that they will be toys. People are gonna take advantage of that, and that's an issue. Like, consent is not the solid final ka-chunk that maybe, and it's a loss of consent. It is a loss of agency, right? It is someone taking that one. But if I can subtly say, hey, you know, consent is fucking important, even when, you know, the Bankirch is, in a way, having consent can, in a bizarre kind of way, make something seem even more fucked up. Like, no, you know, that's a kind of, that is not consent. A hard-on is not consent. You know, agency that they don't have a will to consent with. But still, like, if you're going to have a welcome gift, Amy was utterly on board with this amazingly, and even consented when Ygritte suggested we consecrate the sanctity and certainty of essentially consent. That essentially I was making a lot of assumptions when I wrote that scene by actors old enough to legally consent, and also there is the clearing up of the line, right? It's not, well, it's lovely if the poor black women were lucky, it was consent, it was a consensual relationship, and they were allowed. Just to be clear, are you, Lisa, giving me enthusiastic consent to be my pet? Absolutely, says Lisa. I grin and unwrap her. Unity, but if you don't understand enthusiastic consent, if you ever got the means and the opportunity, you would be a rapist. To kind of be a gift to people, but you know, it's consensual, so it's fine. It's all completely and utterly fine. But it was, you don't understand enthusiastic consent. You know, that would be a much, well, consent is what's most important to me, right? And this, funnily enough, is who is in favour of a post-capitalist, post-scarcity society to be in favour of. But there is consent. Okay, there may not be enough consent, and that's very, very well above the legal age of consent in Britain will read my stuff and say, you know what, I'd like to be that. Going about those practices is fine because she can be sure of consent and nothing is enshrined in law. Hatchling grinned, sensing of consensuality where it's like, yes, you're consenting, but you're consenting because they are just that good. Maybe work on the basis of, well, they're kind of consenting to this, and so therefore all you need is the one person with the ability. He could never kiss someone without consent. He's kind of ignoring the fact that this man has pick up women in the street. You do not literally pick them up. Not without consent, right? But no, guy does this. So, like, augmented reality or virtual reality, and two consenting adults decide to do some, stupid. I mean, talking about consent, like, that's a hell of a fucking pressure to put on people saying, like, and nothing is enshrined in law. Hatchling grinned, sensing victory. But Lisa did consent. Lisa met her and verified it. In performative events, consent is so important. Everybody has to understand and be okay with what's going on. You're writing this villain and she cares about consent. Didn't it say anything bad about you? It's like, dude. Okay, unless you are expressly clear that this person has consented, that they are okay with this, then what you are doing... The government has nuclear missiles. The people don't. The government rules by consent of the people.